Welcome to the CFA Society San Francisco podcast, where we interview and discuss current topics with leading members of the Bay Area investment community. This week, Tanya Subatang, Senior Membership Manager with CFA Society San Francisco, sits down with Christopher Browne, CFA, Chief Investment Officer and Partner with Democracy Investments. Listen in as they discuss the International Equity Index and how capital flow can potentially impact a country's political environment.
Good afternoon, Chris. It was great seeing you again.
Good to see you, Tanya. Thanks for having me on.
I am so excited. We're going to have such a wonderful conversation today. And I wanted to tell our listeners that this is going to be what a timely conversation we're going to have given what's going on in the environment. So I want to kind of jump straight in. But before we talk about Democracy Investments, which is a company that you helped co-founded, I'd like to start in the beginning. Can you quickly share with us your brief professional journey and how you got to be in your current role as Chief Investment Officer for Democracy Investment, and maybe a little bit of what your role currently entails?
Sure. I'll do hopefully the quick resume walkthrough. Started out, I went to undergrad at UC Santa Barbara, graduated from there and went into asset management, worked at a little shop in Santa Monica called Pacific Income Advisors. That was run by a gentleman named Lloyd McAdams, and he had come out of the old Security Pacific Investment Management. Then moved up to the Bay Area and worked at a growth equity shop called Harris, Patel, Sullivan and Smith. I worked a lot with Jack Sullivan, that group, really doing like portfolio administration, that kind of thing. Left Harris in, 94, 95, and went into business with my father. He had put together a group to manufacture shipping containers out of Latin America, down in Venezuela.
Oh, wow.
So we had put together a group that manufacture and rent and all that kind of stuff. As the Chavistas were moving in, I took that as a divine signal to go back to business school. I still had the international bug. I was very much a believer in sort of globalization and that the world was going to this more global environment. And so I went to Thunderbird and got a degree in international business. Did some work for some merchant banks. Worked for Autodesk in a venture group where I met eventually one of the other partners in Democracy Investments, Julie Kane. Well, we can talk a bit more about that later. Worked for managed some fixed income, mostly govies and California munis for California Investment Trust in San Francisco. I had some friends at Franklin knock on my door and invite me over there, where I worked at Fiduciary Trust, which was their high net worth and ultra high net worth private wealth group, and then moving into Franklin Templeton Solutions, where it was more portfolio construction for institutions and the like. And we helped to launch sort of the liquid alts, first sort of liquid alts product. I got to cover the Western United States and Latin America, and so had some great trips and very insightful to be touring down there. Left Franklin in 2018, and again, as I mentioned, we had a family history in Venezuela, and we had Maduro on the runway, ready to leave. But Vladimir Putin told me, "You have to stay. You've got all my gold. I can't have you go." So we were initially looking at doing a Venezuelan sort of reconstruction fund, things like that, for when that opens up, and hopefully someday that'll be an opportunity. Got some interesting insights. Again, crazy sort of things where the China, and it's a great case study for any of the listeners out there to look at the China ocean-wide Genworth financial transaction. If you want to get a look at and sort of see where the cracks in the real estate bubble in China were starting to show, it's a fascinating thing. It was a deal where Chinese real estate company trying to buy Genworth life insurance business, and took 4 years, could never get it done. There were and plot twists and turns. That's a podcast all in itself. Anyway, true crime podcast or something. Anyway, but that gave me some insight. There were some things that happened during that time that gave me some insight into sort of things that were going on. How that got me to Democracy Investments. my colleague who I mentioned earlier, Julie Kane, her background, she happens to be a former naval helicopter pilot. She flew helicopters in the Philippines, and we'd always bounced ideas around doing more on the impact side. And we started talking as 2019 was rolling into 2020. Her concern was around index construction and greater inclusion of authoritarians, and particularly the Chinese push for greater inclusions in broad-based international equity indices. It was like, well, what can be done about this? We had once kicked around an idea, well, gee, is there a way to do sort of a clean China fund? And as we talked to a series of experts, it's like, no, that's pretty hard to do. And so it became, we were kicking this around, and Julie brought in our third partner, a gentleman by the name of Rick Rakowski, who Rick's background is he's got a PhD from MIT in marine robotics.
Wow.
If that'll tell you anything, he builds undersea drones for the U.S. Navy and Google. He's got one of those minds and personalities where he was modeling coronavirus issues with using the Economist Democracy Index. And he said, well, hey, why don't you think about using this thing? And so I call that sort of the Reese's peanut butter cup moment. We took chocolate and peanut butter and made it into something that we thought was pretty good. And so we were off to the races, at least with the business. As far as what I'm doing, my role is now with all of that. The investment process that we have is and maybe as we discuss it further, is very, very simple. We're all systematic, and our algorithm is extraordinarily simple. So it's really more about, for us is, both evangelism and product development, because I don't think that there are just as many folks kind of doing what we're doing and just getting people's heads around the idea that maybe tilting using democracy might be an attractive way of doing things.
So I want to kind of go back a little bit, because I know you touched upon it really briefly, but why don't you explain to our listener exactly what Democracy Investment is and the fund that you guys created? I'd love
Sure.
to think that would kind of give a better understanding further in our conversation.
Yeah. So what the fund is we currently right now, the straightforward strategy that we have right now is we take an equivalent of the ACWI ex-US index. We happen to use Selective because they're cheaper, quite frankly, and they give us great service and all that other fun stuff. I'll give them a pitch. I mean, they've been great partners, and I'd like to support our partners. So they give us a list. It's around 2,700 names, large and mid cap, from that essentially map to the MSCI schema, and we go ahead and assign a country of risk to every single security in that index. We then take Taiwan Semiconductor is usually the number one holding. We take the Taiwan Democracy Score, because that's a pretty easy one to adjudicate. Multiply the market cap by the democracy score, you get a raw number. Do that for all 2,700, and then just everything's a percent of the total, and you've normalized. That's your democracy index. And what that does is, on a relative basis, it tilts away from authoritarian regimes, China at the time when we did it, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and towards more democratic ones, which in this case were more Nordics, Taiwan, Australia, Japan, that type of thing. And so we have the index, and then we also have a corresponding ETF for that. The ETF right now does index replication around it, has about 187 names, and it's DMCY on your NYSE dial. And we use index replication right now with a couple of about 18 or 19 both regional and country ETFs, and then the rest are individual securities in the portfolio.
Why is Democracy Investment, it's given in the name, but you guys are mainly focusing in countries that are embracing democracy, or in that political environment? Is that kind of a passion project that you all three had, or was it, you mentioned earlier that it was like an impact that you guys wanted to make? What was the motivation for starting?
So yes, it's a passion project, because I think if you believe that if you can give somebody their freedom, I think that's the most wonderful gift you can give. So the notion of at least having been in financial services and, being able to find, motivation, it's nice to be able to wake up and put your feet on the floor and at least feel like you're doing something for this. Again, our purpose is right now that we think given what's happening in the world, that this form of that this way will outperform that way. So that's at the small scale. At large scale, this thing becomes weaponized and actually starts to really influence capital flows. And there would be a lovely problem. It would be a lovely problem to have. And I'll say this. I'll encourage folks who I want to give a shout out to Perth Toll to take this opportunity because she's got her Freedom Fund and they're doing it. She's doing it in emerging markets. And to me, a rising tide lifts all boats in these things. That just being able to use that dimension, I think, is important. And I'm happy to give a shout out and recognition to others and tell people to go take a look at it because we're having a hard enough time getting people to embrace just this general concept. I think she's doing a great job pushing it.
Why do you think that is? I mean, this is a form of, I guess I look to you. Would you consider this a form of impact investing or ESG? And, you're contributing to the betterment of the world, not in a save the tree kind of way, but in human rights kind of way. Why do you think there's maybe people are having a harder time in embracing this?
I think first and foremost, it's a marketing issue. I don't think either, Perth nor we have the marketing reach some of the larger players do. This is a relatively new concept out there, and it's moving faster than I think anybody's been expecting. I mean, it just for whatever reason, and you're nodding, and we can see each other even if it's on the podcast. You're nodding your head, and because I keep wondering, and I think that a lot of folks who are out there wonder, okay, does it seem like it's going faster, or is this sort of surreal, or a whole bunch of things that are running through here? So, things are moving quickly. I'm starting to get more, as Julie goes out and talks with people, as I go out and talk with people, I'm getting more nodding heads in the room that are starting to understand it. I think both from the, as I like to call it, both the heart and the head perspective. They get the intellectual investment argument, and then they get the moral argument. I think that sits behind it. And all I can do is hope that it gets picked up more and that people start thinking about things in this way. Now, as far as you mentioned ESG, I think the hard thing now, and this is, and things are moving very quickly with ESG, and everything's going to get and the world is getting reassessed, almost by the minute in terms of, okay, where are the white hats and where are the dark hats here, and how do I get in with the right camp on it? So we don't position ourselves as an ESG thing. One, because it's so personal. Two, we don't screen anything out in the portfolio. So, I think the big one there is energy that people care a lot about. So we have exposure to oil and gas. Now that exposure shifts from, formerly Russia, Saudi Arabia, other authoritarian producers to Norway, Canada, more democratic ones. So, and if you run us through screens that various people, various services have, we'll actually look better than purported ESG specific funds, because I think democracies, as you tilt that direction, they will generally have more of those type qualities in them. So it encompasses a lot, but again, the ESG and impact stuff is so personal that I prefer to stay away from that.
But I mean, obviously, we can agree that supporting these democratic countries who do have intentions and being far more conscious in the environmental changes and the environment issues that we have. I guess we can kind of agree that most of the democratic countries in your list kind of support that initiative of wanting to make some environmental changes.
Yeah,
it's a high score. So
all of them, right? Exactly. That's you're getting that embedded in the democracy tilt. But so if I sit and I say I'm an ESG fund, I have the risk of someone coming up to me and saying, "Well, you hold X, Y, and Z energy companies in the portfolio. How can you call yourself Right. Well, okay. So I know. And that would be, and for me, that would be a common complaint.
Right.
Would I tell you that you get that there are environmental benefits to us and that it's not a zero sum game? Yeah, I'd say that.
Mm-hmm.
So, there are all kinds. I mean, again, this is now the government regulators now are going to start to clamp down on claims. You've seen it with what's happened with Goldman and others who have had these generalized ESG claims, and it's like, oh, well, how are you going to exactly what are we talking about here? Mm-hmm. So until those get defined, we'll see how that. Well, I will politely decline.
You're definitely carving up your own, I guess you could say, branch or thought of that. It seems like. So we're looking forward to see how that works out. I want to go back a little bit because you mentioned earlier about scores and how there's scores for countries, and I think 10 being the highest, right?
Correct.
And then 1 being the lowest, or is it 0?
Well, I mean, it's on it. Nobody gets a 0, nobody gets a 10, but it's a 0. It's a 0 to 10. It's a 0 to 10 dimension on that.
And there's 60 indicators that is applied to this democracy score, correct?
Yeah. So it's in 5 major buckets, generally 60 questionnaires on it. And it's from the Economist, right? So what they do is they divide it amongst, sort of electoral process and pluralism, civil liberties, functioning of government, political participation, and political culture, right? And in there's, they're looking at, things like, whether national elections are free and fair, security of voters, influence of foreign power on government, and the capability of civil servants to implement policies. It's a
very detailed and
so it's been around. The reason we went with it was that it had been around since 2006. It was well established. It's outside of the United States. So I think anybody that would accuse it, a U.S. company using a U.S. index, putting the thumb on the scale.
Right.
So it's, all of that stuff. We wanted to come up with at least a process that would hold up to some degree of, as much objectivity as we possibly could build into the system. And it's transparent and again, outside of our purvey. And because it's got this track record, we think that at least for the next several years, it'll be hard to have that system gamed because it'll be fairly transparent to people if something sort of gets in the works there. And it accomplished what we were looking to accomplish, was come up with some way of adjusting a portfolio to, for lack of a better term, mitigate sovereign risk in an equity portfolio.
So what I wanted to ask was one of the indicators, we'll call it, this is what it's called, was internet. And obviously we all know the power of social media has had in our this generation, right? And obviously we know what's happening in countries this last couple of, it's been a year with the pandemic, the Ukrainian war, and now what's happening in Iran, where social media has played a huge role. And maybe that goes into, ties in with the internet and access. I am curious, in your personal opinion, how social media will play into the future of these democratic countries and how their scores will be impacted because of that.
Well, yeah, because I think that comes all down underneath the same headline of freedom of the press. It would be freedom of information access and levels of censorship there. I think that as a society, we're probably going to struggle with for a little while in terms of figuring out where the boundaries are and what's credible and what's not credible. And somehow we made it through, years of having the National Enquirer right at our grocery stands. And somehow we were able to start to distinguish things from, what might be real versus what might be a little bit of bluster.
Yeah.
But, and we're gonna, I think we're going to continue with all of that. I try and take the longer view, and the hopeful view around it. There are a lot of things that I think are going to manifest themselves over the next several years, that will start to clarify things. I think, if we're to a place where globalization is a little bit in retreat, we're going to, use that as an argument. And, what are the implications for that? What are the resets that are going to be happening? How do that does that affect, as we look at energy prices now, where do we forecast, energy prices going forward, food, so, I mean, folks, as we move into a high inflationary environment, are going to tend to focus on, the basic needs, shelter, food and energy. So that's gonna, those things are gonna, bring some focus to stuff, and there might be some ramifications around that. And so, yeah, as we were talking earlier, it's now everybody's front porch is in your living room, and we're now having to get used to that, and how that feels, and boundaries on both, and where boundaries need to be set on all that versus, how much gets sunshine, how much needs to how much privacy needs to be retained, who gets access to what information in a digital society, and how security around that can be maintained in a free society. And are going to be some very how you build up a culture around keeping those relationships sacred. For lack of a better term, because there's we had so much is said, written, and permanent, and of record, whether it's a financial transaction or an email. Okay, what happens with all that? Yeah. And who owns it? And all these things are going to be really, really, really interesting. Intellectual problems to work out going forward.
A whole new set of problems and worries. I guess it's different.
You pick your problems. I mean, this is the thing is what problem are you going to pick here? And so far, this is what we've chosen.
Chris, you come from a very international background in a sense that you traveled. You said your family's worked in Venezuela. Earlier we talked about you just traveling around the world. Has that, and having worked for Democracy Investments and having obviously looking into other countries, has that at all changed your perspective and how you think of things, whether it be personally or professionally, just having that luxury of seeing so many different things?
Yeah, you come back to just feeling that you were really blessed to be born at this time in this place and this. I mean, yeah, it's just if you don't come away from traveling around the world going, yes, those are beautiful people with beautiful food and wonderful cultures and all those kinds of things. Holy smokes, I'm really happy I was born where I was when I was, and all of that. If you don't have a whole lot of gratitude after that, you might have missed something. and so, yeah, I mean, I think that's the biggest thing is that I'm blessed and highly favored, and I give thanks every day for it.
That's amazing. I mean, to be able to have experiences, I think that probably helps you in kind of distinguishing many things and keeping you with an open mind, So.
Well, and that's again, you meet beautiful people, beautiful cultures, and to be able to drink all of that in. I mean, both literally and metaphorically. But yeah, I mean, well, first of all, Latin culture for me is wonderful. They are they are very warm, open-hearted, welcoming people. Like as I was telling you before we started, I just got back from a visit to Puerto Rico. They're just fantastic and just wonderfully welcoming. And to be able to, it is about the people, about the relationships that you have, and getting the different perspectives and learning the histories and understanding, where people come from, where their cuisine comes from, where their music comes from, how all these things have migrated around, especially when you start talking about the Caribbean and those areas and all the cultural things. You go down to Argentina and you have a big European influence down there, and the Portuguese influence in Brazil, and so it's all the wonderful people and all the smiles you get to see and all the laughs you get to have. So that's what it's about.
It's the most rewarding part. So I know we've talked for quite some time, so I don't want to take any more of your time, but I do have a couple more questions.
Sure.
Your company is a little bit over a year old, I think, right? Is that correct?
We're 2 years. We're 2 years old now.
Wow.
Yeah.
Time flies, huh?
It does.
What are your visions for a company, and what are changes or impacts you hope to see over the next 1 to 5 years?
So my flip answer would be, I would love to be obsolete and out of business tomorrow, because that would mean that would mean that I think anybody in this kind of a strategy or that has a little bit of a purpose built to it should be like, I really hope I go out of business, and the sooner I go out of business, the better it is.
Yeah.
Or that strategy becomes becomes obsolete. Mm-hmm. I don't think I'll be affected by that problem anytime soon, or reasonably soon. For us, it's in part mission driven, in that we would like folks, as I was saying earlier, to at least take a really hard look at these types of methodologies that we and others a couple of others are doing, and consider that for adoption in your portfolios. And we would come out with various flavors as we would build on, obviously, emerging. We could do developed versus emerging markets, because right now we're the entire world. Fixed. There will be opportunities within fixed income. There will be opportunities, for folks for ESG investors who want to do an ESG cut and then maybe a democracy cut, or a democracy cut and an ESG cut. However, there are lots of different ways it can be sliced, and we'll try and follow where investor demand takes us on those things.
Well, that kind of leads me up to my other question, and this is strictly for you personally. I know you're the CIO, but do you have any particular issues, like human rights issues, that you would love to tackle if you are given just any opportunity, something that you want to fix the world in? If you don't, it's fine.
No, well, look, I come from a libertarian background. To me, this is really about freedom, and if you go through, and I tell your listeners to go to The Economist and take a look at the Economist Democracy Index and the report on that, and the state of democracy and individual freedom, and how the authoritarianism is rising, has been rising on the planet. And to me, that's a really big problem. And so I can only do so much in this particular state to go tackle something like that. But from where I sit, and the intellectual exercise that I did to where could have some sort of an impact, this was sort of it. Just one, I could see that there was an opportunity to have this kind of a split between what market cap and this, and two, the opportunity to help provide an incentive. Because again, it's now we're just a strategy that I think can outperform. At scale, we're a weapon, quite honestly, because then those scores matter to bigger players, and they start to have to watch. And there's a degree of accountability in terms of where investment flows go. So if we can get that in that freedom and allow people to have greater self-determination, I think that so much potential can be unleashed.
Oh, I love that. What a great way to kind of summarize all of the things we talked about. So, okay, so my final questions, and I ask this to every single podcast guest we have, is who inspires you and why? Okay,
so I'd seen that you'd asked the question there, and you go through sort of the list of all the famous people, I'll tell you who lately has inspired me. There's a guy at my gym who is, let's see, he's not a big guy. He is very short and not really gifted whatsoever. But he is in the gym busting his ass at 5:30 every morning.
Wow.
And I sit there and I look at this guy and I go, he is making the absolute most of everything he's got. Pick it up, dude. I get inspired by, the folks that do that. I mean, and that's the thing is you sort of go through, who at a big level, I get inspired by the everyday beauty and the triumph of them, of, that conquering story, that, overcoming whatever it is, whether it's the, immigrant or refugee who's been, come to a new land with absolutely nothing and makes it. That's inspiring, right? I mean, whether it's the person with the handicap that overcomes that, and achieves some great, that to me is inspiring. So I love to look for those things every day, because when as soon as I think I'm having a bad day or whatever happening, I'm like, okay, I gotta put on the big boy pants, because there are folks way above me who are way tougher than I am. And so yeah, that's where I get my inspiration from these days.
Oh, that's beautiful, Chris. It really is. I mean, we were in our third season of the podcast, and I've been asking this since the beginning. And people probably wonder, our listeners, like, why does she ask this all the time? It's because these kind of answers. It's that, ability for someone to surprise you, but also reconnect humanity together and say it could be the simplest thing, but it could be the most profound. So I love hearing the answers from you and from everyone, future, past, present, because it's beautiful. Every answer to me is beautiful and I love hearing them. But yeah, I had a great time conversating with you. I love learning more about your democracy investment and really excited to see what you guys come up with.
Well, I hope so. We're scraping along, and it's touch and go right now. But I'm feeling a little Lord of the Rings. We're planning to come back here, and you got to stay at least optimistic about it. And I appreciate you reaching out and giving me the opportunity to tell the story. I hope it was good.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Chris, don't forget about us, CFA Society San Francisco, when you guys are big and doing those national TVs, and maybe you can come back and tell us how this.
Well, from your list to God's ear, but I don't know. We'll see how that all comes together. So the other thing now. So I'll tell you, the absolute silliness in the world that needs it right now. I mentioned I was just down in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and my buddy turned me on to the Netflix show Mucho Amor, the Walter Mercado story.
Okay.
For guilty pleasures, it's hilarious. But have you ever heard of this guy? Okay, no. So he was crazy. He was like Liberace meets astrology in Puerto Rico.
Wow.
Okay, that's kind of. I think that's kind of that's probably the easiest way to wrap your mind around it as quickly as you can. But he would just the thing on Netflix is fantastic, and he would always sign off with mucho amor, and it's just like, but in a world where we need like now, it's like that's what we need.
That's what we need.
So it's either Ringo Starr, peace and love, or Walter Mercado, mucho amor. Anyway.
Well, I think everyone will be listening is probably really very much laughing out loud. And thank you for the chuckle for today, Chris. I think everyone will appreciate it.
All right. Have a good one. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for listening to this month's episode of the CFA Society San Francisco podcast. We hope you enjoyed the engaging discussion. Please stay tuned for more episodes of this podcast featured every fourth Tuesday in our weekly newsletters and through the CFA Society San Francisco podcast channel, available through most major podcast apps.